I know Wade earlier was asking who had been to Product Hive, who'd been to Front conferences and how many years previously. I've been here every year since they started in 2015, and I have just been super excited every single year, and it was really, really sad when they didn't have it last year. But I'm glad to be back here, and glad to be presenting and sharing today. In fact, I kind of feel like Front is, for me at least, a little bit like Christmas. It's like product practitioner Christmas. And I'm like so excited for Christmas. Like this is like Christmas morning. We're all wearing our Christmas pajamas that we opened last night. And our parents aren't up yet, but we're opening up some of our presents and then taping them shut very carefully. So it looks like we haven't opened them yet. And those presents that we're opening are Margaret Lee, Daniel Falabella. Mine's going to be like the aunt who gives you the annual Christmas fruitcake, but it's still Christmas, and so I'm super excited about that. Tell you a little bit about myself. I was previously just barely left Prenda. Was a general manager over the Prenda Family Plus business unit there. They had several different business units. And previous to that, I was at Draschil for 7-ish years. And that was a really fun ride. We'll talk a little bit about that during our presentation. And these are my presenter notes. They'll bring this back up. So the title of the talk is More Value Sooner, Barnacles Are Killing Your Product Team's Flow. And what the problem is that we had been at Draschil studying the best and the brightest. In 2015, I had come across Marty Kagan and started devouring his stuff, and Jeff Gothelf and Jeff Patton and several others. And then we hit Front, and I learned about Nate Walkingshaw and directed discovery, and learned that not only was this in a book, but people were really out there doing it, and it was super exciting. And so maybe you're in a similar situation. Maybe you're thinking, yes, we've done it at our company. We have autonomous, empowered teams led by a product triad, UX, PM, engineering lead, and we're doing human-centered design. We're doing research, voice of the customer, design thinking. We're building those into solutions and validating those through customer user testing. We've got continuous delivery on what we're doing instead of like huge 4-week sprints or even 2-week sprints. And even our roadmap is not a feature-based roadmap driven by the CEO or sales or even just big customer requests. It's theme-based, and we're able to respond accurately or quickly and with agility. You did it. You've lived the dream. I mean, this is it, except how come you're still moving so slowly? Why does it still take your team so long to get from understanding the customer's pain point to actually solving that pain in the product in live production? So customers suffer, your team is getting pressured to cut corners. It feels wasteful. You're stuck in never-ending stories, user stories I'm talking about, because it turns out like you think it's a really easy user story, and then you peel off the layer, and then there's another layer underneath, and it's just a giant onion that never ends. It's an onion fractal. The more you go into it, the more details it shows. And if you are anything like me and my team were at Draschil around 2017, you may be thinking, we can't do it the right way. It's too slow. We have so much pressure to move. That's ivory tower, but this is the real world. Nate Walkingshaw, you lied to us. Marty Kagan, you lied. Jared Spool, Peter Meyerholtz, Teresa Torres, and Melissa Perry, you all lied. You promised us. But what if there's hope? What if you weren't doing What if something was there, hidden, holding you back? This is my postulation, my thesis here, hypothesis, is that if you were anything like us, then you were. You were building too much. What if most of our product work is actually bigger and therefore slower and maybe even less outcome-based than we think it is? What if there were some simple but powerful practices that could help your product team start consistently delivering value to customers in days rather than weeks or months? And I'm here to tell you that there is. It's a great big fruitcake worth of simple but powerful principles. So we're going to talk about a few of those. I mentioned Draschil. That's where I was at until October or September, October of last year, 2020. And here's the situation with Draschil. We were in that very thing. From 2015 to about 2018, it was a constant state of too much urgent, critical work with roadmap timelines and that were stretching out into years, really, if we put it all together. And so most of the time we didn't try to do the math because it was just so depressing. Draschil is, just to give you the background on what type of product, they're in the software space for direct selling and network marketing MLM companies. They aren't an MLM. They build the software that those MLMs run on, which can get pretty fun, but also pretty complex. It's a B2B2C model, which means clients white label it, and then they offer those tools to their field and also run their own system on that tools. So you're spreading everything from marketing tools and e-commerce shopping and reports, report builder, report generator, earnings, sales tools, training, communication, chat, and lots more. And all of that is only what you're giving to the customer, right? Then there's all the company stuff that's in the back end. CRM, e-commerce, again, you have to control the e-commerce experience, comp plan programming, real-time calculations, which is crazy because there's giant trees. And this one person makes a purchase, make one order, and it trickles all the way up the tree and it changes everybody's rank. And you have to go up and down the tree constantly calculating stuff. It's pretty crazy. So we had startups and SMBs, mid-tier. We even had a couple of billion-dollar companies there. So ultimately, we're servicing, even with just a few dozen clients, we're servicing hundreds of thousands of users. Is there any water out here? If not, maybe I can grab one or have somebody grab one from behind, just so I can keep going. So that's the situation Draschil was in. And in 2017, we had just crazy hypergrowth pains. We were set up right. We thought we were ready to be poster child for the product organization and product process, but our software suite was only 1 year old. So with all of that stuff, we had bug fixes and, thank you, Ben. Ben Peck, everyone. It was only 1 year old, so we had bug fixing, scaling issues that we needed to be doing for growth and implementing our product roadmap, because as we're selling to everybody, our table stakes, we're trying to catch up with those, and then they're expanding as we're finding out more from the system. So sales way oversold. We were struggling to implement new clients, struggling to stay ahead of the features that sales sold that we didn't have in the product. And so by May, our implementation pipeline was so full, it was stuffed and overflowing. In fact, it required our implementation rate to be, if we would have done it, which we didn't, it would have been 6 times more than it actually was, and 6 times greater than we'd ever launched previous to that. And there was just no, on top of that, we had to enter a new party plan market, which is like a whole new version of the product and new features, flow, admin controls. We died. I mean, the company didn't die, obviously, it lived on, but what we were trying to build, our hearts died, and a lot of our clients died. At least they left us because we had to push off the launch dates months and months. We lost trust with clients. We lost trust in our brand. We lost trust in ourselves, our ability to do it. And frankly, there was some trust lost in the product process. Hey, if we're doing things right, then how come you can't do any of this? And this is us. We didn't have a great answer. We still believed, but we didn't have an answer. So fast forward 2 years, beginning of 2019, there's another company transformation from a services-driven model. We had lots of professional services we'd build out for them. We had our product teams and then our services. And it was a software suite at that point. We were moving to a multi-sided platform, which means that we were going to be, instead of doing the services ourselves, we're going to be opening it up to an extensive platform model and inviting third-party developers to develop and build stuff for the clients and extend it so that the clients can do whatever they want instead of just asking us and then we become the pipeline. So it was like we were moving into becoming a Shopify or a WordPress, except for it was very much that same thing. Shopify, in a way, was one of the competitors for a tool within that space, and WordPress, a website builder. But that was only like a quarter, if that, of all of the stuff that we had to do. That was like 2 of the products. And we didn't have the resources that Shopify does. So constrained resources, huge compelling vision, a complete company transformation, and still all the regular roadmap table stakes and client reactive issues. It was, again, a do or die. But this one turned out very differently. Although it was a fire, it was a refiner's fire because we had learned something from the last time around. And that thing that we had learned was that we now knew how to deliver more value sooner and how to avoid barnacles. So with that intro, let's talk about what these things are, and we're going to start with why. Okay, so what are barnacles? Barnacles are pernicious, hidden work items. It's any work that doesn't have to be done yet, and yet it attaches itself to the critical work, the essential work that has to happen right now, and gets basically a free ride up the priority list. You'll see as we go maybe what some of those are, but off the top of my head, an easy way to think of it is to consider, like, this is an easy barnacle, one that's a really nice to have, and it's way down on your priority list, but you still would really love it. It's got a special place in your heart, but you don't really need it. That's a barnacle if it attaches itself and moves up the priority list, if you end up working on that before some of the must-haves lower. So what are some of the reasons why this approach? First off, opportunity cost. What are you not doing in order to do the thing that you're doing? In order to build that really nice to have UX card-based view that I can swipe left and swipe right and hold down and it pauses and I tap. I'm not saying you don't do those things, by the way. That might be core to your experience. But if it's not, you're saying no to everything else that's sitting back there. The other thing about this approach is it allows the team to nail the core job to be done, the core pain point, but safely leave the epic or the work that you're doing before the full vision of the feature is realized. So you got that's a safe approach, right? Maybe I don't build everything I wanted to or that the clients want, but we're building everything that we need to and that the client or the customers need. Law of diminishing returns, right? The farther you go down on your prioritized list for any project or story or epic or initiative, the less it's going to be valuable, and that 80-20 Pareto principle is in play. Lastly is that you really don't know up front everything that you need to know. You're going to be wrong, maybe a little, probably a lot, and your scope and solution will evolve as you move forward. So trying to put everything into into like a big design up front, pretending you know everything when you literally know less. You never know less about a project or a story or whatever than at the very beginning. And so that's obviously not when we should be doing all of our big design. And then just anything that we designed at that point, we don't want to have all of that follow us through into the delivery pipeline, or even most of it follow us through. And frankly, that's what was happening at Draschil, and that's what happens at a lot of product teams. So how do you do it? You all know this part. I'm going to put this right here. You all know this part. So opportunity backlog, top priority, whatever that is, it gets pulled out and you move it over to the problem space. You're doing user research, you're doing mapping, empathy, customer journey, ethnography, and then once you have a really strong understanding what the problem is and have turned that into like a job to be done to solve that problem, then you move it over to the solution space, right? And in the solution space, if you're doing things right, you're coming out with a customer-validated solution instead of just, hey, we like this. And this also works, you know, the whole valuable, usable, feasible, viable, it checks them all off. Your PM's doing their job, and you have a solution. Well, in the more value sooner approach, what you end up with is not just a solution, but what I call a North Star vision for the solution. Because what it really is it's a big fluffy dog. I don't know if y'all have seen like Shaggy Dog, or maybe what are those called that are the little puffy Pomeranians? They can be really, really puffy, and then if you shave them down, and they look like a little rat, and they're like this, they're just tiny, and you realize, okay, so much of this big fluffy dog wasn't actually part of the dog, and of course, you don't want to shave off everything down to the bare minimum because there's stuff you want to keep on the dog so it's not a rat. But that North Star vision is going to get smaller. And so here is what we start with. And I'm kind of representing it by this big box. That's the full vision with all of the features and stuff that we have story mapped out. So if you're familiar with story mapping, we've done the whole thing breadth-wise, and then depth-wise, it's got all of the depth from the different options and things we want to build in if we had time. Take that North Star vision, and here's the part where it really kicks in. Identify I'm not going to call it MVP because that is too heavy-laden. It may mean different things to everybody. I'm borrowing a phrase called SLC, which is simple, lovable, and complete. So everybody's seen this drawing or diagram. Basically, the simple, lovable, complete is not incremental, but it's iterative. Everything that you deliver is complete, meaning it delivers value itself. It doesn't have to be like, this goes forward, and you're not going to care until this other thing comes up. The simple, lovable, complete piece has to be complete itself. In other words, you could assign an outcome or a job to be done to that thing, and then put in there all of the work necessary to do it. And so that concept actually works with all of the boxes. But the simple, lovable, complete is just the very first one. And the key is that it solves the core job to be done. That's the definition of the SLC. The core job to be done with the least amount of work possible. It follows what one of my favorite phrases is, barely sufficient, which is as much as necessary, as little possible. And here's kind of a key principle here. The SLC actually is so small that it may not even meet all of your product, design, and technical standards. You're like, wait a minute. Like, it literally just solves the problem of whatever that particular client's request was, or whatever this specific customer pain point is, even though you know that within the larger context of the product vision, the product roadmap of where we're going, the technology infrastructure, there'd be a right way or a better way, or in the UX case, a better experience before we would say we're done with it. Like if you just left the SLC by itself, the slick by itself, you'd be shortchanging, you'd be cutting your nose off. That's not the right metaphor. Cut off your nose to spite your face. You'd be shortchanging yourself. So back to this, the SLC, it's just a tiny portion. Notice that the full story is mostly not being engaged here. Then what you do is you break the rest into independently releasable iterations. Value-based chunks, I already kind of talked about this with job to be done or outcome assigned to each one of them. And remember, the SLC has the core job to be done, but then one of those other ones might be, or a couple of those, might be getting the UX standards up to the place that we would call, at direct scale, we call it direct scale standards or direct scale quality. And that meant that it had to meet certain standards that we had. And we couldn't just be using Bootstrap. Even if that was the fastest thing to implement, we couldn't be using Bootstrap and keep it like that way for the actual rollout. Sorry, for the final piece, even though the Slick might have just had you use Bootstrap. This is one of those pieces. Notice that the rest of the story has been broken out into independently releasable items. What this means is I could build this little blue box and ship it, and it wouldn't have to be tied to anything else. It wouldn't have dependencies like, oh, well, we forgot to update the table, so it doesn't actually store the information. The API call is not there. Or you can click into the modal, but you can't click out because there's no JavaScript close function on there. So it's just kind of stuck there. It's got to be complete. And what you'll find is that user stories, every time you do this, user stories will turn into user epics. And that's maybe the first real insight here, is that most of what you're doing is way bigger than you think it is. What you think with user stories are a series of 3 to 10 or maybe more user stories within it, except what we're doing is we're just pushing it all together and going, this is one user story. How many story points is it to our developers? And they go, well, this is like a 21. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means. Next point is you assign release priority to all of these items. So if you're familiar, an easy way to use this to talk about this would be the Moscow method, MSCW, which is must have, should have, could have, and won't have. I usually don't call it could have, I call it nice to have because it makes a little more sense. And so the SLC is the core must have, but you also might have other must haves in there. Like I mentioned, there's product principles you got to abide by, technical UX design. There might be the SLC worked for one customer type, but you know that you have to service all of them because you've got maybe another persona that's like the admin for it, or you've got another persona that is another side of the other customer piece. And so what we've done here is we've broken out each of these into priorities, and I didn't write it up here, but it's going to go must-haves into, at some point it turns into should-haves, and it has nice-to-haves, and there's no reason to put won't-haves up there. So R1 through 6 are for sure that priority order in this case. I'm like, okay, well, we know that we'll do R6 after R5, but then the one after that, I don't know if that's going to be R7 or if R7's later on here. And honestly, there's no real strong need to heavily define that right now. That could change, and so why do the work right now? We want to avoid waste. If they all go, if you just take it at this point and then you go through all those releases, you're going to have barnacles. If even most of these go, you're going to have barnacles, things that are getting free rides and really should be done. So there's a key part here. We call it now the ROB, which is release of obligation. It releases the team from the obligation of continuing to work on this particular epic. I can move off onto other stories, which are going to turn into epics themselves. What this does, so it's basically at this point, I'm going to do my SLC, and then right after that, we're going to follow it up with R1, and then R2, and then release 3. And then after that, we can decide whether we're going to go to release 4, release 5, release 6, or whether we're going to move to something else in the backlog. But that's the point where we can pull our heads up and look around. And what this does, it's pretty critical. It fights the fear that leads to large batch tendencies and coupling. Product teams, developers, UX designers, people who care about the product experience, they think, if I release this, and I release just this SLC that's not going to meet all our UX standards, but it's going to be good enough for that one use case, what if we never come back? Look, if we never come, I'm going to put all of everything I can into that SLC, everything that I want to get, because we're going to have one shot at this. So what the Rob does is it lets you say, don't worry, we can release this iteratively. We can get more value out sooner without you worrying about losing everything else, and then the product manager pushing on, or maybe the product manager isn't doing it, but the executives pushing it out onto the next thing. Yeah, you got the MVP out, time to move on. The point is, nothing comes before the Rob. No other work can get inserted into your pipeline. If you do, you're robbing yourself. That's why it works. Of your vision, your principles, standards, etc. You're building in debt. So remove the barnacles by excising them, pulling them away from the slick and the Rob, and reinserting them back into the backlog. This R4, R5, and R6, if they're not in the Rob, then is that more important to do R4, even if I love it? Or is number 2 more important? There's a must-have in number 2. And there's also a bunch of barnacles in number 2 that you'll cut out. But you can see quickly that if one is a piece of work that's that's going to take you 30 days, and you've moved it down to 4 days, then when you go to number 2, that also takes you 30 days, but you can move that down to 4 days. Then within 8 days, you can get 1 and 2 done instead of 60 days in order to get 1 and 2 done. And over time, this thing adds up like crazy. So no free rides on barnacles. So back to the 2019 platform revolution. What happened? We followed this principle not just on individual story level, but on major pieces of the system. So Kristen Smith is here today. She was the product manager over the UI visual commission programming. So previously, you had to have a developer, and they had to write it out in C#, and no one could write it out except for some of our professional services. And we needed to change that so that anyone could write it out, whether you worked at Draschil or not. And we also wanted them to be able to do it if you weren't a developer. Well, our best one would be a full visual UI with a drag and drop. Spiff actually is speaking later on, and their stuff is fantastic. But we thought, we can't get that and everything else that we need to do. So what's the slick? And what Kristen's team came up with, and it was brilliant, was an XML editor. Because you don't have to know programming in order to learn XML, which is basically different pieces of information in a certain format. And they knew that they could follow that on, if it was the right thing, with a piece that was a simple drop-down UI that would replace the XML editor. And after that, it becomes a drag and drop and a bunch of things. So that was brilliant. And we did that all over with these huge chunks of stuff. And so, again, the takeaways here are no barnacles, no free rides for anything, just as much as necessary, as little as possible, and then you too, your roadmap can take off, and you can do incredible things in an incredibly short amount of time. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Let's get to some questions.
I brought my iPad out anyway, just like a safety blanket.
Yeah, we were talking about that. It's kind of like your guitar. When you sing, you can sing, but you can't sing without your guitar,
yeah.
Right?
If you've ever worked with me, you know that I really can't talk without a whiteboard behind me. So I'm going to try to talk, but just holding it here.
So Lara asks, how do you make sure you have time to revisit your SLCs and build those next iterations? A lot of companies, startups especially, tend to move from SLC to SLC and from shiny thing to shiny thing. Yeah.
There's probably a lot in there. I'm going to try to answer what I think is the core of the question, which is how do you avoid going from SLC to SLC when there's other stuff that you've got to do to make it a little bit better. The key is the Rob, and you understanding that you're not going to you should think of the work that you're doing as the Rob, as whatever has to be done in those releases in order to get this thing out at our quality level, to solve the problem, but then to solve it in a product way and that meets our UX standards and our technical standards. And if you think about that as the work, then when you're moving from Rob to Rob, sure, you're going to be letting a lot of stuff go that you love, and you're like, I really wish this could be a graphical, even just a drop-down, or making them learn XML. But the point is, would your customers rather have a little value, would they rather have all this value later on, or would they rather have you delivering the core value today and an iteration on that tomorrow with its own outcome, and after that, days apart? I'll tell you, if you ask your customers, they're going to tell you, give it to me as soon as you have it, and don't wait.
They never like waiting, do they?
They don't like, no.
Don't waiting room after waiting. It's like the doctor's office, right? Okay, how do you handle dependencies across multiple teams with releases and each SLC? SLC.
Yeah, that one gets a little more complex. First off, some of that's going to be hopefully designed, addressed by your product leadership and your organization by having your teams be working within bounded context around their domains. That might not be the case of your company. It also might be that that is your case of your company, but sometimes these are cross team initiatives. One of the ones that we had actually in the 2019 platform revolution was, which I didn't say, but the company, I guess I never said how that happened. That worked out really well. The company had the greatest sales year that it's had. It launched at the rate that we wish we could have launched in 2017, and they're still building out that, iterating on the beautiful redesign or reinvention. Getting back to the question, which was, remind me.
How do you handle dependencies across multiple teams?
So one of the ones we had was Blitz Start, was our internal nickname for it. The goal was, the high-level job to be done was get a client in 90 minutes from sign-up to they're live with all of their stuff set up and taking customers in 90 minutes, which is pretty crazy because a standard company takes 90 days up to that point, and we wanted to do it within 90 minutes. And what it required was the leads of all the different teams, DevOps and a few different of the platform teams and almost all the app teams coming in and building out the release map together. And we weren't able, in that case, of course, your first release has to be a small sliver that's simple, lovable, complete, and so it takes multiple teams. And so you're coordinating across teams, but because you've broken it down together, everybody's on the same page, and also everybody's super excited too. DevOps was like, I can't believe this, we're gonna do this in 30 days. What would normally take us 6 months to build, we're gonna get that same value out, and we did.
Awesome. Anna wants to know, can you give an example of an SLC plus shaving the fluff off an SLC?
Yeah, this is a good one. Ritika is here. She's a user experience designer. And when she was working on it, there was a data editor, which is basically, you saw a database table, and you need to be able to find the table that you're looking for and be able to see it visually, and then go in there and edit certain cells and add entries to it. So one of the primary uses, it was going for the customers, but also our internal support would use it when somebody had some missing information and there was no UI to do it. Sometimes they had to go into the database directly, and we later evolved past this, but so what the SLC was there, I'll give you an example of breaking out things you might normally put together and how you can sliver these out and deliver the different pieces in an iterative manner. You needed to be able to navigate your tables, be able to say, hey, let me show the tables. So at the very first, there was just a box there that let you type in some pseudo-SQL that says from, and then you'd have to type in the label name, the table name. And you could see the table name in a big, long scroll list. And then after that, you could click it, and it would pop up and you would click the thing, and it would show up there, the table would. But then it wasn't pinned. You had to here's the table, and then next to it was a table list, and it was just this giant thing. And so you'd scroll down, and the table would go off the screen, and you'd just be scrolling down, seeing this one table list. So pulling that into a small box was a second release. And normally you'd think, look, here's the design of what it's going to look like from the UX designer, and then you give it to him and say, build that. But the UX designer working together with product manager and engineering can go, okay, where are we at, and what are iterations we can do? It's going to end up here, but that we can be delivering these things in much faster pieces. So, like I said, it's not always the UX that you want, for example, or the technology approach that you want at the very end, but it is there. It is there at the end, even if it's not there on every single release.
So you see each iterative update as you go along. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. I think that's all the time we have, and let's give Joseph another round of applause. Thank you.